Well, so I hope you will look at this as just an introduction, and if you're really interested in it, we offer a class that meets every semester where you're focused in learning this and developing more of the skill you need. And it really requires a lot of bench time of practice usually. So I just want to go through setting up the wheel and talk about some of the things you'll need to know about the equipment, and then we'll talk about some of the basics. And then you'll have, I would say, this whole week to be here. Next class I'll be talking about another aspect of finishing things on the wheel in the middle of the drying cycle, the leather hard stage. We call it trimming. We'll do another demo. So today and Thursday, you could be generating new things here and still have time to get them through 1 or 2 firings, depending on when you'll be meeting for the final time. So the wheel is, wheels could be a shallow depression in packed earth that someone is sort of spinning an object with a stick. We have the luxury of electricity, and all of our wheels that we have now are electrically powered, and they have a foot pedal that allows you to control the speed of the wheel like driving a car, so like the pedal of a car. So we'll go into that. Before you even turn it on, you have choices. How many of you are right-handed? Okay, and not to leave anybody out, how many people are left-handed? Nobody. Okay, cool. So if you're right-handed, you want the wheel, when it's turned on, to go counterclockwise. So that this toggle switch on the control panel, when it's turned furthest away from you, will allow it to go counterclockwise. If you wanted it to reverse, you would turn it toward you before turning the wheel on, and it will go clockwise when it's turning. So always make sure it's going in the right direction for your need. So that, and then the other thing is the on-off switch, which there'll be a green light that comes on that lets you know there's electricity in the wheel. Okay, so when it's on, you can see it's going counterclockwise, which is good. The wheel head itself it's metal, and it has concentric rings that are etched into it so that you can visually locate exactly where the center is. This is very helpful and important. We have these sort of screws that are attached with wing nuts. At the very beginning, it used to be they could come out, so you could work directly on the wheel, but now they're kind of permanently lodged in there. So I would encourage you to use, before beginning, what we call a bat, B-A-T. We have several different types. It's a removable surface that attaches and then comes off at the end. Normally, when you use a bat, you're using it for a form you don't want to remove soft because it'll distort too much. So you can dry it on here until it's got more rigidity. This one's very easy. It's just holes that are drilled for this spacing. The textured side goes up, and then you just kind of drop it on top, and then the heads are flush, and it won't hurt your hands when it's turning. This one I spent, a year trying to figure out what in the hell to do to get this to go on there. It's got 2 sets of holes that are spaced at 2 spacings. So the one that fits ours, it has 3 dots like braille on the side that helps you locate the hole. So I always find the hole, and because I can't see it from the top, I have to kind of mark the spot with my thumb. Then it fits on, and then I can locate where the other, and it should be on like that. Okay, so one of the things about learning the wheel is the forces you're working with to create the form are gravity, which is a constant pushing down, and then the centrifugal force that is pushing out from the center when the wheel is turning. It's like a shaft of force. So you're working up or down and in and out against those 2 forces. One of the ways that you'll be able to have control is bracing. And so your body position is very, very important. What I recommend is taking your chair, you always want a low chair like this, push it, I didn't even talk about the splash pans. Where did they go? Right here. I'm going to interrupt. This is not a requirement, but it's suggested, which are these two-part splash pans that catch the runoff or the spin-off of the wet clay and water. They're stacked there by the sink in two sections. There are two parts that are different. One has a kind of a slot and the other has a hole. So you need to get one of these. I always slide one in, angle it, and slide it really flat until it locks under the shaft underneath the wheel. The other one, same deal, and it should go flat until it locks into the first piece, and it all should move like this. If it moves this way, it is installed improperly, and it will let you know when you turn the wheel on. It'll be really loud, and you don't want that. Okay. So, okay. So now what I'm going to suggest is that you take your chair and just push it all the way till it hits the wheel, and then slide to the front of the chair. So your center is as close to this center as possible. One of the things is, with wheel throwing, if you ever feel tingling or stress or some kind of feeling of the pressure as it occurs in your wrist and your hands, you're not really taking advantage of your core strength. We really aren't relying on just the wrist and below. All the bracing comes from alignment of your back, how it channels into your shoulders. You're down into your locked-in elbows, and then you can kind of lean against to move things. All right. By being closer, I can move with all this bracing, but have my hands free to work around that invisible shaft of force without losing my bracing. Okay. The tools I recommend that you bring here are, these are all in that kit if you bought a kit. This is called a throwing sponge for a reason, this little round sponge. Your needle tool, this angled wood tool, some kind of rib or scraper. I like the flexible metal one, but if you have a plastic one, that's also good. Okay, and the wire. The wire. All right, so I've got water, buckets there, water. I'm ready. No water anywhere yet. I've got some very nice, soft, really well wedged clay that's 2 pounds. We have scales on the plaster wedging table so that you can measure your clay. And why that's important when you're working on the wheel is how you know that you're getting more volume. Your hands are getting smarter to this, is you'll be able to get more volume out of the same amount of clay as you go along, okay? If this changes each time, you won't have that way of measuring that. So at the beginning, I would say, measure your clay so that you have that barometer of how that's developing. And more than 2 pounds is too much for most beginners. It's just not going to help you, okay? So make sure the clay is nice and soft and 2 pounds or less. So it's wedged. I've got a dry surface, and now I need to attach this to the dry surface, whether it's the metal or this bat. In my case, a bat. Do not be too polite, don't just rest it there, okay? It really needs to be attached. You can kind of do a little paddling to make sure before the wheel gets turned on. Okay. So now that I have it attached, you can see what full speed ahead is. Full speed ahead really is only helpful if you have 50 pounds of material to get the force. So I can tell in 2 seconds by watching people on the wheel who I want to get in the car with and who I do not want to ride with. Okay? So it's really exciting to go full speed ahead, but it's going to probably work against you. Okay? Too much force puts you not in the control seat. So I would say medium for when it's solid. As this becomes more hollow and wet, you want to decrease the wheel speed slowly. So I'm going to start with medium when it's at its most solid. And just so I don't unconsciously speed up and slow down in mid-move, I'm going to set the wheel speed, and then I can take my foot off the pedal and it won't fluctuate. That's very common for beginners to do that. Okay, now I'm going to wet my hands to reduce the friction, and I'm going to wet the clay. Again, You can see my legs are bracing around the splash pan. My elbows need to find some place they're lodged in. If they're out here, I'm not going to be able to be centered and braced. It's going to be moving me asymmetrically. The goal is to create a strong negative space between my hands where the clay can conform and find symmetry. Okay? So that takes some strength and bracing. All right, so now that I've got the water, I'm going to be centering the material solid before I open it into a hollow form. This is called centering. I would recommend you seeking out, if you're interested in this, there's a book that was written in the 1960s by N.C. Richards. It's called Centering, and it's a philosophical look at a potter and the idea of centering and sort of the spiritual and connection to that. And it's a very, very interesting book, okay, that has it's been out of print, but now it's back in print. You probably get it on your Kindle or on Amazon or whatever. Okay, so centering is two parts. I'm going to take the bottom half of my palms. Now, the reason I'm not going to use the whole surface is I won't be able to make a line of force to move the clay. It'll just stay there. Okay, I'm trying to move the clay and bring centeredness. So I'm going to make a line of force. My right hand is at 1 o'clock, if this were a clock face. My left hand's about 7. My elbows are tucked in. Medium speed, I'm going to push my hands together and then move the clay up into a cone against the centrifugal force. Okay? The second part of centering is to lower this cone with equal and opposite pressure between my hands. So I'm going to let my left hand rest on top. I'm going to tilt the top of the cone forward and clockwise against the way the wheel is turning. From the back knuckle, I'm just going to tilt it. And as this is getting lowered with my left hand, my right hand is going to be pressing in and back. Now I'm going to repeat. It's important to begin with a harder touch, and then as I slowly move up, my touch is getting lighter as the cone is getting narrower. It's like a decrescendo in music, okay? Hit it hard and then back off. If I stop and keep applying pressure in the middle, this is going to snap off, okay? So you want to keep it a fluid gesture. And then the second part. Okay. Because I've been doing this so long, I'm going to make this look really easy. Okay, I know this. It's a terrible cooking show when somebody makes it look really easy. So it's really vital with all cooking show demo things that you get engaged with it, because it's going to be very different for you. But I'm hoping to. And by the way, there are no right or wrong ways like most techniques. There's just consequences. So I feel like, because you're seeing me touch it this way, there's probably infinite variations that you should feel like you can explore as you develop your own touch. How do you know if something's centered? Well, visually you can see asymmetry when it's moving around. But if you want to do another test is to get some tension in one of your fingers. Start in the center and then glide down. If it's in constant contact, you're centered. If it's asymmetrically bumping, you'd have some more work to do. I'm almost there.
So this process is about getting it centered, essentially?
This solid mound has to be completely symmetrical around that force, so that when you open it, you can have even walls and yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yes. So mine is centered. The next thing we should talk about is the mound proportion before I make it hollow. So tall, narrow mounds tend to support taller forms. lower, wider mounds support more open forms like bulbs. There are wider support for that curve to extend. So I almost always recommend that people practice or learn to make a basic cylinder, which means if I were to open this theoretically, I would have the hollow form essentially be the diameter of the solid form, right? So if you have a proportion in mind, I mean, it'll be much taller, but that'll be the width. So if you have a width in mind, you might want to start with the solid being that width. Just going to change it a little bit. Okay. So once I've got my centered amount, I need to find the exact spot in the middle and drop a single hole in the center. Not that easy, not always that easy to do, but one trick is, some people like this, you can grab it with both hands and then push your thumbs together, and that helps you locate the middle. I prefer to have a smaller opening, so I usually am really confident with my thumb tension. I just put my thumb there. I can feel the vortex of it all spinning, and I know I can just push straight down. Elbow tucked in for stability. And just because the wheel is turning fast doesn't mean I have to drop the hole fast. Okay? You can work really slow, just push straight down. Okay? The only time I'm going to touch this without the wheel turning is to check what will be the thickness of the floor of my cylinder. So I use my needle tool. I'm going to drop it down till it hits the plastic bat, finger down till it hits the end of the hole, pull it out together. If I open the floor, right now, that's how thick the floor of my cylinder will be. It's probably a little on the thick side for a small cylinder, so I might drop the hole a little deeper just to get, like, say 3/8 of an inch. Okay. Now, the minute I open it like this, I start to think of my hands in a certain relationship. I believe you have the most options if you can learn to have your left hand be your inside hand and your right hand on the outside, if you're right-handed, and vice versa if you're left. So I'm going to lean to the right. That's why I always have you look at what's happening on the right, because that's where I'm working primarily. Okay. Now I want to go in with all that bracing and bend at the knuckle, and just with maybe 2 tips worth of surface of my fingers push out to make a groove just at the floor line without opening the top. So I could use the sponge. So I've got a firm grip here. I'm bending at the knuckle. Okay, so I went like this and pushed out. So now I have a hole and a groove of space and a big chunk of clay through here. The next move is to take that big chunk of clay and distribute it more vertically. So I'm going to have my left hand again. It's going to be more receiving of the action of my outside hand, pushing the clay in against centrifugal force and up against gravity, running it along my firm receiving fingers. I'm going to start right at the bottom. I'm pushing in, and then start slowly moving up. Okay. So you can see I have a slightly conical form, but what's really important to do is to begin to now study the shape of the inside versus the shape of the outside. It'll help you locate where your material is to get more volume in the next move, okay? Mine is pretty similar, but this wall is still pretty thick, so I know I have more I can bring into this cylinder. While I now have access to it, I want to work on the floor. So that looks like taking any water that's gathered there out and transferring it to the bucket. Also pressing down and compressing the floor against a sort of medium, fast, or slow wheel by pressing in the center, pushing that clay to 3 o'clock, pressing down, and pushing it back to the center to compress it. Uncompressed floors often yield stress cracks in the drawing because the walls are very compressed with your touch, and you need the floor to also have that compression. So if you ever feel like your clay is too dry, I like to work with minimal amount of water because water decreases the structural capacity. The more you touch it with water, the more it gets weaker. But if your hands are catching because it's dry, you can just run some water down the side, just run it down your fingers and coat the outside. Okay, now we're going to talk about the first, the real core activity of wheel throwing is called lifting or pulling. And both hands are going to be engaged equally. For this thickness, I'd probably use 2 fingertips worth of surface, so 2 fingers working as one. My inside fingers are going to be flexed at the knuckle so that I can push out. And then my equal and opposite, my right hand, is going to be pushing in to pinch in against, sort of like you depress under a ridge of material in the wall. I'm going to hold that depressed amount and then send it up toward gravity. So centrifugal force is the pinch and the pull is gravity. So here we go. Here's the pinch and here's the pull. As I'm slowly moving up, my touch is getting lighter. All the way up over the rim. You can reestablish the rim of a wheel thrown vessel is a tension ring. It keeps this form round. So if it stays centered and dry and compressed, if it doesn't get too thin, it will have that structure to keep this, allow you to open and close it. The minute it gets too wet and too thin, you're going to lose the structure of that. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just do another lift. A cylinder, should allow for you to get most of this material into the volume. It doesn't require any extra to support a shape. It's very stable. It's all taken straight down. So I'm going to do another pinch and then pull, knowing that the bottom fifth is where most of the material is, and now my touch is much lighter so I don't overfill the top. Okay. I would recommend doing 3 lifts. Just try and get it done in 3 or less. Anything beyond that's going to have a greater likelihood of making it very weak with water. Okay. I'm going to try one more, and then I'll So I'm going to split this open so we can talk about the cross section. But before we do, I want to talk about getting something off the wheel. So for vertical forms like this, Helena, would you grab? There's 2 sheet metal. We call them pot lifters. They look. Yes. No, not those. They're flat. Do you see they're like flat? They're bent like an angle? Yes. Perfect. That's great. Thank you so much. So to get something off the wheel, because really storing a vertical piece like this on this big board is not the most efficient thing, so you could take it off and sort of stack multiples on a smaller board. One thing you can often do is a little trimming of extra material with this wood tool. I would have the angled side in, lead with the point. You have to be just as braced. Find where you want to try and remove some. And then just push down. The angled thing will separate a band of material away from the piece. Then I can take my needle tool, cut through an underscore. And try not to have it reattach. Okay. Next, I need to release this from the back. I'm going to choke it on the wire so that my thumbs are just wider than the object. You can wet the wire. It's a slow wheel. Pull it taut, press down, and pull straight toward you. Okay. These are very helpful to move a weak, thin, wet item because they pick it up from underneath. Like any piece of clay, wet clay is going to stick to metal, which we don't want, so you want to wet them first so that the clay won't stick to them. Then I'm going to slide it in just under the edge, slide the other one in flat on the other edge, and then I can pick it up, move it, transfer it to the board, right? So let me just cut through this one. So you can see I did a pretty good job of getting a nice even wall. The tighter these rings are spaced, the more that speaks to the control of the pressure, the speed in which my hand was moving compared to how fast the wheel was turning. Whenever you get big spiraling thicks and thins in a wheel-thrown object, it's usually because your hand was moving much faster as it was moving the clay than the wheel was turning, so you get those broader. You want, usually, the bottom to be a little thicker than the wall so that at leather hard, I'm going to recenter these objects back on the wheel upside down, lug them down with soft clay once they're recentered, and against the centrifugal force, use the metal loop tools to trim. And in that trimming, I can lower the center to leave a raised foot ring on the bottom of this. So we'll do that on Thursday. Need a little drying time for that. Cleaning this, I would always, if you're learning the wheel, you might have 5 or 6 2-pound pieces lined up because you're probably not going to get as far as I do. And so when things get overworked or collapse, don't keep reusing tired clay. Let it dry on the plaster for 10 minutes and then you can re-wedge it and use it or put it back in the bag. But always have fresh clay for once the material you're working with gets oversaturated. To prepare this one for the next piece, I'm going to dry the wheel with my wooden tool. Just scrape away the excess and the water. Okay. Now I can take the piece, attach the next one. So this time I'm going to go through those same stages, but I'm going to talk about shaping the cylinder. Okay, so you'll get a chance to expand. I have no expectation that someone starting today will be able to make a cylinder today. Okay, it could take months for some. It can. Some people get it sooner than others. You know how it is. There's just always that one person that sits down and says, "Got it!" Right? You know who that is. We've all been in a class with those people. But mostly there's just a lot to go through to get your body used to the forces, how you have to be, when the pressure, all of that takes time. You can't really skip those steps. Okay, so once you get it reattached, again, bottom, like a line of force to make this move up against the centrifugal force into more of a cone shape. So I'm going to press in. Your hands should appear to be stationary. If they're moving with the off-centeredness of the material, you're not in control of it. Okay? Second part is to tilt this forward and clockwise. It'll go straight down, but what's going to center is while I'm pushing down, I'm pushing in against that force with my right hand to center the clay in between. Okay. So once I get it centered, which I'm almost there, again, I'm just going to think about what I'm making and how the mound could support a shape. Still going for a vertical shape, so I'm going to make my mound a little taller and narrower. All right, got to find that center spot and then drop a hole. Start the hollowness with a single hole right in the middle. And just before I open the floor of this, I'm going to determine how thick that is first. Find my needle tool, which always...
It's under the...
Okay, thank you. Oh, that's about right. Okay. Now I'm going to bend at the knuckles and open a groove of floor right where, at the end of the hole, out into my sponge. Usually 2 fingers gives me more stability to do it, acting as one. Okay, so I have a much wider groove right here. Now I'm going to push in and run the clay up, a more receiving part of my left finger. Okay, so now I have a thick, more hollow form where the inside mirrors the shape of the outside. Now I'm going to do my first lift, and that is pinching and pulling. So I'm going to go in, flex my knuckles so I can push out and push in and grab or pinch under a ridge in the wall, hold it with tension before thinning it upward against gravity. Here's the pinch, and here's the pull. Slow, steady movement upward, slower. My hand is moving up slower than the wheel is turning. Okay, now this is where we're going to add something. So after that first lift, I've got enough of this material distributed vertically that I can change the profile of this by stretching it out past where the mound supports it and make it narrower. We think of your inside hand, which is our left hand for right-handed people, as being the shaping hand. When my inside hand is lower than my outside hand, I'm pushing the form out on a diagonal line to make it wider. When my inside hand is higher, I'm wasting or narrowing the form in underneath. So this is what it looks like. My inside hand is higher, so I'm going to waist in. My inside hand is lower, so I'm thinking of a diagonal line out. My inside hand is higher, so I'm going to waist in. My inside hand is lower. Okay. Just working on the floor a little bit, drying it, compressing it, making it really flat so I don't get any of those cracks. Now that I've established wider points and narrower points, I can go back in and do some volumizing around those points. I do not want it to be, I want to make the thicker parts of this where it changes direction. If it gets too thin at those changes relatively to what's happening above and below it, gravity will stretch it too far and collapse it. Okay, so but I can thin between those points really easily. So this might be a moment that I also use my flexible scraper as a way to help me create a shape. So I've just got a finger pushing the form out to meet the edge of this to help shape it. The advantage of this versus your hand, it also scrapes the surface of the water to give it more structure. It dries it again. Sometimes I can also the thing about, because we're going to be trimming these at leather hard, you really should be more focused on the shape as it appears on the inside, because the outside gets trimmed to match the inside. So don't just be mesmerized. Sometimes you can have a beautiful profile outside and there's just a shaft of negative space on the inside, right? So be more focused on the form as it occurs on the inside and you'll be good. Okay, so I'm going to keep this one alive so that I have something to trim for you on Thursday. But I will do a little bit of editing with my wood tool, take a little of the excess away. The rest I'll take care of when it's leather hard. Did that do that again? There it is. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to leave it. So if I were making especially a plate or a low wide form or a bowl form, I would certainly use this as the way to dry it on the shelf before the trimming process. So I think I'll just keep this attached. So I would say to you, given that we're in our last days and everyone's managing drying things and firing things and touching things to get them in the kiln in time, those projects probably should have your first priority, and then once you get those further along, if you get on the wheel today while I'm here, you have me as a coach, right? So you might want to, before we all leave, just get some time on the wheel so I can help you when you need help. But does anybody have a question now before I let you go do your, okay, cool.